The rain hammered against the windows of the small coffee shop in downtown San Diego, creating a rhythmic symphony that seemed to match Sarah Mitchell's racing heartbeat. She sat in the corner booth, her fingers wrapped tightly around a lukewarm cup of coffee, her eyes constantly scanning the entrance. At 28, Sarah had the kind of presence that made people look twice, not because she was conventionally beautiful, though her sharp green eyes and determined jawline certainly caught attention, but because there was something fierce and unbreakable about her that radiated from within. She had been living a lie for the past 3 years, and today, that lie was about to catch up with her in ways she never imagined possible. The fake Navy SEAL credentials tucked away in her apartment had seemed like such a small deception when it started. Just something to help her get respect in a world that seemed determined to underestimate her at every turn. But lies, Sarah had learned, have a way of growing like weeds, spreading their roots deep into the soil of your life until they become impossible to remove without destroying everything you've built. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed, and Sarah's stomach dropped as 2 men in military uniforms walked in. They weren't looking around casually like customers. Their eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency, the kind of scan that comes from years of training and experience. When their gaze landed on her, Sarah knew her time was up. "Sarah Mitchell?" The taller of the 2 men approached her table. His voice was steady, professional, but not unkind. "I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, and this is Corporal Johnson. We need you to come with us." Sarah's mouth went dry. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, but now that it was happening, all her carefully planned responses seemed to evaporate. "I don't understand," she managed to say, though they all knew it was a futile attempt at innocence. "Ma'am, we have evidence that you've been impersonating a Navy SEAL. This is a serious federal offense. You need to come with us for questioning." The coffee shop had gone quiet. Sarah could feel the eyes of other customers boring into her, their whispered conversations creating a low buzz of judgment and curiosity. Her cheeks burned with shame, but beneath that humiliation was something else, a deep, aching sadness that had been her constant companion for years. As they escorted her to their vehicle, Sarah's mind drifted back to where it all began. She had been 19 when her older brother Marcus shipped out to Afghanistan with the SEALs. He was everything she had ever wanted to be: brave, confident, respected. Marcus had always been her hero, the one person who believed she could do anything she set her mind to. When news came back that his unit had been ambushed and that Marcus was among the missing, something inside Sarah broke. The official reports were vague, filled with military jargon that seemed designed to obscure rather than clarify. Marcus was listed as missing in action, presumed dead, but his body was never found. For months, Sarah held on to hope that he might still be alive, that somehow he would find his way home. But, as time passed and no word came, that hope began to transform into something darker, a desperate need to somehow keep his memory alive, to honor the man he had been by becoming the person she thought he would have wanted her to be. The detention facility was exactly what Sarah had expected: sterile, intimidating, designed to break down the resolve of anyone who found themselves within its walls. She was processed with mechanical efficiency, fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings confiscated. Throughout it all, she maintained a stoic silence, knowing that anything she said would only make things worse. Her cell was small and sparse, containing only a narrow cot, a sink, and a toilet. The walls were painted an institutional green that seemed to suck the life out of everything it touched. Sarah sat on the edge of the cot and, finally, allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The facade she had maintained for so long was crumbling, and beneath it was a woman who had been drowning in grief and guilt for years. She thought about the veteran support groups she had attended, using her false credentials to gain entry. At first, she had gone simply to feel closer to Marcus, to understand the world he had inhabited. But, as she listened to the stories of real veterans, men and women who had seen combat, who carried invisible wounds from their service, she began to feel like she belonged there. For the first time since Marcus's disappearance, she felt like she was part of something meaningful. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been trying to honor her brother's memory by pretending to be something she wasn't, but, in doing so, she had dishonored the very values he had stood for. Integrity, honesty, service, these were the principles that had guided Marcus's life, and she had trampled on all of them in her misguided attempt to keep his legacy alive. Hours passed in the cell, marked only by the changing quality of light filtering through the small, barred window. Sarah's thoughts turned to her parents, who had never fully recovered from Marcus's loss. Her father had retreated into his work, spending longer hours at the office to avoid coming home to reminders of his missing son. Her mother had thrown herself into volunteer work, as if helping other people might somehow balance the cosmic scales and bring Marcus back to them. Neither of them knew about Sarah's deception. As far as they were concerned, she was working as a security consultant, a job that required occasional travel and explained her sometimes evasive answers about her work. The thought of having to tell them the truth, of seeing the disappointment and shame in their eyes, was almost more than she could bear. The sound of footsteps in the hallway broke through her reverie. A guard appeared at her cell door, accompanied by a man Sarah didn't recognize. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of long military service. His uniform was different from the others she had seen, more formal, with insignia that suggested high rank. "Ms. Mitchell," the guard said, unlocking her cell door. "You have a visitor." Sarah stood uncertainly. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and she certainly hadn't been allowed to make any phone calls yet. The older man stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "My name is Commander William Hayes," he said quietly. "I'd like to speak with you, if you don't mind." There was something in his tone that wasn't quite what Sarah had expected. Not the stern condemnation she had prepared herself for, but something softer, almost gentle. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and followed him to a small interview room. The room was as institutional as the rest of the facility: fluorescent lights, metal table, uncomfortable chairs. Commander Hayes gestured for her to sit, then took the chair across from her. For a long moment, he simply studied her face, as if trying to read something written there in a language only he understood. "Tell me about Marcus," he said finally. The question caught Sarah completely off guard. She had been prepared for accusations, for demands that she explain her actions, for legal threats. She hadn't been prepared for this gentle invitation to talk about the person who had been at the center of her pain for so long. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Your brother. Marcus Mitchell. Tell me about him." Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time since her arrest. "How do you know about Marcus?" Commander Hayes reached into a folder he had brought with him and pulled out a photograph. It was a military portrait, Marcus in his dress uniform, looking proud and determined and impossibly young. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen this picture before. "Marcus served under my command," Commander Hayes said quietly. "He was one of the finest men I ever had the privilege to know." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. All this time, she had been living with the abstract grief of losing someone whose military life she could only imagine. Now, sitting across from her, was someone who had actually known Marcus as a SEAL, who had served alongside him, who could tell her things about her brother that she had never known. "I don't understand what this has to do with," Sarah began, but Commander Hayes held up a hand to stop her. "Your brother never stopped talking about his little sister," he said, a slight smile crossing his face. "He was so proud of you. Always showing pictures, always talking about how smart you were, how determined. He used to say that if you had been born a few years earlier, you would have been the first woman SEAL." Sarah felt the tears she had been holding back begin to flow freely. "He's gone," she whispered. "He's been gone for 3 years, and I missed him so much. I wanted to understand what his life was like, what he went through. I wanted to feel close to him." Commander Hayes nodded slowly. "Grief makes us do things we never thought we would do," he said. "It makes us reach for connections in whatever way we can find them, even when those ways aren't healthy or honest." "I know what I did was wrong," Sarah said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know I dishonored his memory. I dishonored everyone who really earned the right to call themselves a SEAL. I felt so lost without him." "Sarah," Commander Hayes said, leaning forward slightly, "there's something you need to know about your brother's mission." Something in his tone made Sarah look up sharply. There was a weight to his words that spoke of secrets long held, of information that had been classified and carefully guarded. The official reports about what happened to Marcus and his team, they don't tell the whole story, Commander Hayes continued. There are things that have been classified for national security reasons, things that couldn't be shared with families at the time. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of things? The mission your brother was on when he went missing, it wasn't a standard operation. His team was working on something special, something that required the highest level of security clearance. They were tracking a high-value target, someone who had been evading capture for years. Are you saying Marcus might still be alive? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Commander Hayes was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. I'm saying that the situation is more complicated than the official reports indicated. There are aspects of that mission that are still classified, still ongoing. Sarah felt her world tilting on its axis. For 3 years, she had been living with the assumption that Marcus was dead, that her grief was the grief of permanent loss. Now, Commander Hayes was suggesting that there might be more to the story, that the brother she had mourned might not be gone after all. I can't tell you everything, Commander Hayes said. Not yet. But, I wanted you to know that your brother's sacrifice, whether that sacrifice was his life or something else, was not in vain. The work he was doing, the mission he was on, it made a difference. It's still making a difference. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. Why now? Commander Hayes looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. Because I think you deserve to know that your brother would understand why you did what you did. He would understand the need to feel connected to something bigger than yourself, the need to honor his memory in whatever way you could find. But, he would also want you to find a way to honor that memory honestly. What happens to me now? Sarah asked. That depends on a lot of things, Commander Hayes replied. The charges against you are serious. Impersonating a military service member is a federal crime. But, there are also factors that could be taken into consideration: your motivation, your brother's service, the fact that you never used your false identity for financial gain. Sarah nodded, understanding that she was being offered something, not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps an opportunity for redemption. There's something else, Commander Hayes said. Something I need to ask you. What? In the course of your activities, using your false identity, did you ever encounter anyone who seemed unusually interested in your supposed SEAL background? Anyone who asked detailed questions about operations, about personnel, about anything that seemed beyond normal curiosity? Sarah thought back over the past 3 years, trying to remember if there had been anyone who fit that description. There had been so many people she had met through veterans groups, so many conversations about service and deployment and the challenges of returning to civilian life. There was one person, she said slowly. A man named David Chen. He attended some of the same support group meetings I did. He claimed to be a former Marine, but there was something about him that didn't quite add up. He asked a lot of questions about SEAL operations, about specific missions. At the time, I thought he was just curious, maybe trying to understand different branches of the military. Commander Hayes pulled out a notebook and made some notes. Can you describe him? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to recall details. Asian American, probably in his 30s. Average height, maybe 5'8" or 5'9". He had a scar on his left hand, shaped like a crescent moon. He said it was from an IED explosion, but something about the way he told the story felt rehearsed. Did he ever ask you about any specific operations? Any particular dates or locations? He was interested in operations in the Hindu Kush region, Sarah said. Afghanistan. He wanted to know about missions in that area between 2018 and 2020. She paused, a chill running through her as she realized the significance of those dates. That's when Marcus went missing. Commander Hayes looked up sharply. You're sure about that? Yes. He was very specific about those dates, about that region. At the time, I thought maybe he had served there himself, maybe he was looking for information about his own unit's activities. Sarah, Commander Hayes said, his voice taking on a new urgency, this is very important. I need you to think carefully. Did this man ever suggest meeting outside of the group setting?
Did he ever ask you for personal information, contact details, anything like that?
He asked for my phone number, Sarah replied. Said he wanted to stay in touch, maybe meet for coffee sometime to talk more about our experiences.
But I never gave it to him.
Something about him made me uncomfortable, even though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Commander Hayes made more notes, his expression growing increasingly serious.
Is there anything else you can remember about him? Any other details, no matter how small they might seem?
Sarah racked her brain, trying to recall every interaction she had had with David Chen. He had an unusual watch, she said suddenly. It looked expensive, but not like anything I'd seen before. The face was black with silver markings, and the band was made of some kind of unusual metal. When I complimented him on it, he got defensive, almost angry.
Said it was just a cheap knockoff he'd bought overseas.
You have an excellent memory, Commander Hayes said, continuing to write.
Anything else? He mentioned having family in Seattle, Sarah said.
But, when one of the other group members said he had relatives there too and suggested they should connect, Chen backtracked. Said his family had moved, that he'd lost touch with them. Commander Hayes finished writing and looked up at Sarah with an expression that was both grateful and concerned.
Sarah, what you've just told me could be very important. More important than you might realize. Important how?
I can't go into details, but the man you've described, David Chen, he might not be who he claimed to be. Your observations about his behavior, about the inconsistencies in his story, they align with some intelligence we've been gathering about someone who has been attempting to infiltrate veteran networks to gather information about classified operations. Sarah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach.
You think he was a spy?
I think he was someone with an agenda that had nothing to do with healing from combat trauma, Commander Hayes replied carefully. And I think your false identity might have made you a particularly attractive target for his questions. The implications of what Commander Hayes was suggesting began to sink in. Sarah had thought her deception was a personal failing, a way of dealing with grief that had gotten out of hand. Now it seemed that her lies might have inadvertently put her in contact with someone dangerous, someone who might have been using her supposed military background to gather intelligence about real operations.
Did I tell him anything that could have been harmful? Sarah asked, her voice filled with anxiety.
From what you've told me, it sounds like you were careful not to provide specific information, Commander Hayes said. But, the fact that he was asking about the Hindu Kush region, about the specific timeframe when your brother went missing, that's very concerning.
What does this mean for Marcus?
Sarah whispered. Commander Hayes was quiet for a long moment. It means that the mission your brother was on might still be active in ways we didn't fully understand. It means that there are people out there who are still very interested in what happened during that operation, and what Marcus and his team might have discovered.
Sarah felt overwhelmed by the flood of new information.
In the space of an hour, her understanding of her situation had completely changed. What had started as a simple case of identity fraud had become something much more complex, with potential implications for national security and for her brother's mysterious disappearance.
What happens now? She asked.
Now, we need you to tell us everything you can remember about your interactions with David Chen, Commander Hayes said. Every conversation, every question he asked, every detail you can recall. And we need to discuss what role you might play in helping us understand what he was really after.
You want me to help you?
Sarah, you've already helped more than you know just by sharing what you remember about Chen.
But there might be more you can do.
If he was indeed gathering intelligence about SEAL operations, particularly operations related to your brother's mission, then you might be one of the few people who has had direct contact with him.
Sarah felt a mixture of fear and excitement.
The possibility of doing something that might actually help find answers about Marcus was appealing, but the thought of becoming involved in whatever dangerous game David Chen had been playing was terrifying. I need to think about this, she said. Of course, Commander Hayes replied.
This is a lot to process, and I understand that you need time.
But, Sarah, I want you to know that whatever you decide, your cooperation today has already made a difference. The information you've provided about Chen could help us protect other veterans, other families, from the kind of manipulation he was attempting. As Commander Hayes gathered his papers and prepared to leave, Sarah felt a strange sense of purpose beginning to emerge from the chaos of the day. For 3 years, she had been lost in grief, trying to honor her brother's memory in ways that had ultimately dishonored everything he stood for. Now, for the first time since Marcus had disappeared, she had an opportunity to do something that might actually make a difference. "Commander Hayes," she called out as he reached the door. "If I decide to help, if I agree to work with you to learn more about what Chen was doing, what would that mean for the charges against me?" Commander Hayes turned back to her with an expression that was carefully neutral. "It would mean that your cooperation would be noted and taken into consideration. It wouldn't erase what you've done, but it might provide a path toward making things right." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the small interview room, her mind racing with everything she had learned. The brother she had mourned for 3 years might not be dead. The deception that had brought such shame upon her might have inadvertently put her in contact with someone who posed a threat to national security. And, now, she was being offered a chance to help uncover the truth about both situations. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she might finally be able to do something worthy of the brother she had loved and lost. The path forward would not be easy, and it would require her to face the consequences of her actions honestly and completely. But it was a path that led toward truth, toward redemption, and possibly toward answers about what had really happened to Marcus Mitchell in the mountains of Afghanistan. As she was escorted back to her cell, Sarah made a decision. She would help Commander Hayes and his investigation in whatever way she could. Not because she hoped it would reduce her punishment, but because it was what Marcus would have done. It was what honor demanded, and honor, she was beginning to understand, was something that had to be earned honestly, one choice at a time. The next morning brought with it a different kind of awakening for Sarah Mitchell. She had barely slept, her mind churning through everything Commander Hayes had revealed about Marcus and the mysterious David Chen. When the guard arrived to escort her to another interview, Sarah felt a strange mixture of apprehension and determination. She had made her decision during the long, sleepless hours of the night, and now she was ready to face whatever came next. The interview room was the same sterile space as before, but this time Commander Hayes was not alone. A woman sat beside him, perhaps in her 40s, with short auburn hair and eyes that seemed to take in every detail of Sarah's appearance and demeanor. She wore civilian clothes, but there was something unmistakably military about her bearing. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Agent Patricia Vance," Commander Hayes said as they all took their seats. "She's with a specialized intelligence unit that's been investigating the security breach we discussed yesterday." Agent Vance extended her hand with a firm grip and a direct gaze. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for agreeing to speak with us. I understand this situation has been overwhelming, but your cooperation could be crucial to our investigation." Sarah nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "I want to help. If there's a chance that this could lead to information about my brother, or if it can help protect other people, then I need to do whatever I can." "Before we begin," Agent Vance said, opening a thick folder, "I want you to understand the gravity of what we're dealing with. The man you knew as David Chen is actually believed to be an operative working for a foreign intelligence service. His real name is Wei Liwei, and he's been systematically infiltrating veteran support networks across the country, gathering information about classified operations." The news hit Sarah like a cold wave. She had suspected that Chen was not who he claimed to be, but learning that he was an actual foreign spy made her feel sick with worry about what information she might have inadvertently provided. "The operation your brother was involved in," Agent Vance continued, "was part of a joint task force tracking a network of arms dealers and intelligence brokers operating along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Marcus and his team were closing in on a major figure in this network when they disappeared." Sarah leaned forward, desperate for any information about Marcus. "What kind of major figure?" "Someone who had been selling American military intelligence to hostile foreign governments," Commander Hayes replied. "Someone who had been responsible for compromising multiple operations and putting American lives at risk. Marcus and his team were within days of capturing him when their communications went dark." Agent Vance pulled out a series of photographs from her folder. "What we've learned since then is that this network has continued to operate, and they've been actively seeking information about what Marcus and his team discovered before they went missing.
Wei Liwei's infiltration of veteran groups appears to be part of a systematic effort to gather intelligence about that operation. Sarah studied the photographs Agent Vance had laid out on the table.
They showed various people in different settings, some in military uniforms, some in civilian clothes, some clearly surveillance photos taken without the subject's knowledge.
One face stood out immediately.
"That's him," Sarah said, pointing to a photo of David Chen.
"That's the man from the support group." "We thought so," Agent Vance replied. "This photo was taken 3 weeks ago at a veterans gathering in Phoenix."
"He's been moving around the country, targeting different support groups, always asking the same kinds of questions about operations in the Hindu Kush region."
"But why target me specifically?" Sarah asked.
"I mean, before yesterday I thought my brother was dead.
What could I possibly tell him that would be useful?" Commander Hayes exchanged a glance with Agent Vance before answering. "Sarah, there are things about your brother's mission that we haven't told you yet.
Things that his team discovered before they went missing that make them particularly valuable to the people Wei Liwei works for." Agent Vance opened another folder and pulled out a map of Afghanistan and Pakistan, marked with various colored pins and lines. "Your brother's team wasn't just tracking arms dealers. They had uncovered evidence of a much larger conspiracy, a network that involved not just foreign operatives, but American citizens who were providing classified information in exchange for money." Sarah felt her world shifting again.
"You're saying there was an American involved in whatever happened to Marcus?"
"We're saying there's evidence that someone with access to high-level intelligence has been feeding information to hostile foreign governments for years," Commander Hayes said carefully. "Marcus and his team were close to identifying this person when they disappeared."
The implications were staggering.
Sarah tried to process what this meant for Marcus, for the circumstances of his disappearance, for the 3 years of grief and uncertainty her family had endured.
"Do you think Marcus and his team were killed because they got too close to the truth?" Sarah asked quietly. "We don't know," Agent Vance admitted. "That's part of what we're trying to determine.
What we do know is that Wei Liwei and his associates are still very interested in what your brother's team discovered, which suggests that whatever information they gathered is still relevant and potentially damaging."
Sarah looked again at the map spread out on the table.
The area where Marcus had been operating was marked with several red pins, indicating locations of interest to the investigation.
"What do you need from me?" Agent Vance leaned forward. "We need you to help us understand exactly what Wei Liwei was trying to learn from you."
Every question he asked, every piece of information he seemed interested in, could help us piece together what he and his handlers are really after. For the next several hours, Sarah went through every interaction she could remember with the man she had known as David Chen. Agent Vance and Commander Hayes took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details.
As the interview progressed, Sarah began to see patterns in Chen's questions that she hadn't noticed before.
He was particularly interested in communication protocols, Sarah realized. He kept asking about how SEAL teams stayed in contact with command during deep cover operations, what kind of backup communication systems they used if their primary channels were compromised.
"What did you tell him?" Agent Vance asked. "I didn't really know anything specific," Sarah admitted.
"I just gave him general answers based on things I'd read online or seen in movies. But now I'm wondering if he was trying to figure out how my brother's team might have communicated what they learned before they went missing."
Commander Hayes nodded grimly. "That's exactly what we're afraid of."
If Marcus and his team did manage to transmit information about their discoveries before they disappeared, and if Wei Liwei's people could access those communications, they might be able to identify the American operative we're looking for. The conversation was interrupted by Agent Vance's phone buzzing with an urgent message. She read it quickly, her expression growing serious.
"We've got a problem," she said.
Wei Liwei was spotted this morning at another veteran support group meeting in Denver.
"He's still active, still gathering information. Which means he hasn't found what he's looking for yet," Commander Hayes said. Agent Vance looked directly at Sarah. "Which also means we have an opportunity.
If we can stay ahead of him, if we can figure out what he's really after before he finds it, we might be able to stop him and potentially learn what happened to your brother's team." Sarah felt a mixture of hope and fear.
What are you proposing? We're proposing that you help us set a trap, Agent Vance said.
You continue to appear to be a former SEAL with knowledge about operations in the Hindu Kush. We arrange for Wei Liwei to make contact with you again, but this time under controlled circumstances where we can monitor everything he says and does. The idea was both terrifying and appealing. It would mean continuing the deception that had already caused Sarah so much shame, but it would also give her a chance to actively contribute to finding answers about Marcus. It would be dangerous, Commander Hayes warned. Wei Liwei is a trained operative. If he suspected he was being set up, he wouldn't hesitate to take extreme measures to protect himself and his mission. But it might also be our best chance to learn what really happened to Marcus and his team, Agent Vance added. And to stop a foreign intelligence operation that's been compromising American security for years. Sarah thought about her parents, about the years of uncertainty they had endured, about Marcus himself and the values he had stood for. What would I have to do? Agent Vance outlined a plan that was both simple and complex. Sarah would be released on a form of supervised custody that would allow her to return to her normal life while the investigation continued. She would resume attending veteran support group meetings, but this time with sophisticated surveillance equipment that would allow Agent Vance's team to monitor her interactions in real time. The key is to make contact seem natural, Agent Vance explained. Wei Liwei has been systematically working his way through veterans groups across the country. Based on his pattern of movement, we believe he'll be in the San Diego area within the next 2 weeks. We need you to be visible, to create opportunities for him to approach you. And, when he does? You let him believe you have information he wants, Commander Hayes said. But you don't give him anything real. We'll provide you with false but plausible details that will keep him interested while we track his communications and identify his contacts. Sarah understood that what they were asking would require her to essentially double down on the deception that had already gotten her into so much trouble. But, this time, the deception would serve a larger purpose, one that might finally provide answers about Marcus and help protect other people from the kind of manipulation she had experienced. There's something else, Agent Vance said. We've been investigating the possibility that Wei Liwei isn't working alone in this country. We believe he has at least one American contact who's been providing him with information about where to find veterans with knowledge of specific operations. You think someone is helping him target specific people? We think someone with access to military records has been identifying veterans who served in particular locations during particular time periods, Commander Hayes confirmed. Someone who could tell Wei Liwei exactly who to approach and what questions to ask. The thought that an American was actively assisting a foreign spy in targeting veterans made Sarah feel sick with anger. These were people who had served their country, who were dealing with the physical and emotional wounds of that service, and someone was exploiting their trust and their pain for money or ideology. I'll do it, Sarah said firmly. I'll help you catch him, and whoever else is involved in this. Agent Vance smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. I was hoping you'd say that. But I want you to understand that this won't be easy. You'll essentially be living a double life for weeks, possibly months. The stress can be enormous, and the danger is real. I've been living a lie for 3 years, Sarah replied. At least this time it's for the right reasons. Over the next few hours, Agent Vance and Commander Hayes outlined the operational details of the plan. Sarah would be provided with a cover story that explained her release from custody. The charges against her were being reduced in exchange for cooperation with an unspecified federal investigation. She would return to her apartment, resume her normal routines, but with the understanding that she was now under constant surveillance by both friendly and potentially hostile forces. The most important thing, Agent Vance emphasized, is that you maintain your normal behavior patterns. If Wei Liwei has been monitoring you from a distance, any sudden changes in your routine could alert him that something has changed. But how will I know when he makes contact? You won't have to worry about that, Commander Hayes assured her. We'll be watching. When he approaches you, we'll be listening to every word, ready to intervene if things go wrong. As the briefing concluded, Agent Vance handed Sarah a small device that looked like an ordinary fitness tracker. This will allow us to monitor your location and communicate with you discreetly. It's also equipped with a panic button that will bring immediate assistance if you feel threatened.
There's one more thing, Commander Hayes said as they prepared to leave. Sarah, what you're agreeing to do takes real courage. Your brother would be proud of the choice you're making. For the first time since this ordeal began, Sarah felt like she was finally moving in the right direction. The shame and guilt that had consumed her for so long were still there, but they were now tempered by a sense of purpose and the possibility of redemption. As she was processed for release, Sarah thought about the weeks ahead. She would return to her apartment, to her job, to the routines of normal life, but everything would be different. She would be playing a role that required her to maintain the very deception that had caused her downfall, but this time she would be doing it to serve justice rather than to escape from grief. The irony wasn't lost on her that her false identity as a Navy SEAL, which had started as a way to feel closer to Marcus, might now be the key to uncovering the truth about what happened to him. In trying to honor her brother's memory through deception, she had inadvertently positioned herself to honor it through service to something larger than herself. As she walked out of the detention facility, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just Sarah Mitchell, the grieving sister who had made poor choices. She was now an active participant in a federal investigation, someone whose actions could have real consequences for national security and for the families of service members who deserved to know the truth about their loved ones. The sun was setting over San Diego, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded Sarah of the childhood evenings she had spent with Marcus, listening to his dreams of military service and adventure. Those dreams had led him to places she could only imagine, to dangers she was only now beginning to understand, and ultimately to a disappearance that had shaped the last 3 years of her life. Now, as she prepared to return to a normal life that would be anything but normal, Sarah felt closer to Marcus than she had since his disappearance. Not because she was pretending to be a SEAL, but because she was finally doing something that required the kind of courage and sacrifice that he would have understood and respected. The game with Wei Li Wei was about to begin, and Sarah was no longer just a target.